That morning in Seattle, it was colder than usual. A silvery gray sky blurred the rows of houses along Lake Union, and the thin mist mixed with drizzle softened the light through the window pale, like a morning veil for a dream about to fade. Emily Carter stood in the familiar kitchen, holding a steaming cup of coffee. She heard the ticking clock, the slow drip from the leaky faucet, and her heart's steady, weary beating, still trying to believe everything was fine. On the sofa, Ethan's white shirt was draped carelessly. Emily's eyes paused at the collar where a faint red lipstick stain marked the fabric like a paper cut. A tiny mark, yet it pierced through her like a bullet. She stood still for a long time, her breath caught in her throat. The scent of coffee mingled with a trace of unfamiliar perfume that lingered around the shirt, tightening her chest. Emily reached out, her fingertips trembling as she brushed the stain, then pulled back as if burned. Ethan stepped out of the bedroom, buttoning his shirt and glancing at his phone. Tall, composed, a little unkempt but still carrying that quiet confidence that had once made Emily fall in love during the early years of their marriage. "You're up early," he said casually. "I couldn't sleep." "You came home late last night," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Yeah, just a late meeting." Ethan didn't look at her. He slipped his phone into his pocket and moved toward the table. Emily said nothing more. She handed him his coffee, smiling as always. But when he turned to grab the toast, the screen of his forgotten phone lit up on the table. "Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again." A red heart at the end. The coffee spilled over her hand, scalding. Ethan turned, saw her pale face, and asked quickly, "Are you okay?" She held up the phone, her voice shaking. "What does this message mean, Ethan?" A heavy silence filled the air. Outside, rain beat against the glass, keeping time with her breaking heart. Ethan looked at her, his gaze faltered, then hardened. "It's just a misunderstanding. A colleague sent it by mistake. Don't lie to me." Her voice trembled. "I've tried not to doubt you, but I know. It's been going on for a while, hasn't it?" Ethan sighed, looking away. "You're tired, Emily. I'm tired too. We've been trying for too long." The words cut cold and clean. She stepped closer, tears spilling over. "Can you just tell me the truth? Just once. Do you still love me?" He was silent for a long time. Then, evenly, he said, "No, I don't love you anymore." The world stopped. The rain fell silent. The clock froze. Everything in that kitchen turned still, like a sheet of paper torn in two. Emily stepped back, her hand trembling. The cup slipped and shattered. She stared at the fragments, realizing that her love had broken just the same beyond repair. She sank into a chair, choking back sobs. "What did I do wrong, Ethan?" "No one's wrong," he said, voice cold and distant. "We're just different." Emily wanted to scream and cry for him, and she'd given up her career, youth, and everything else to build this home. But the words jammed in her throat, dissolving into tears. Ethan turned, picked up his coat, and walked out. The door shut behind him with the sound of a verdict. In the kitchen, only Emily remained, the lipstick-stained shirt and the smell of cold coffee. She sat still, listening to the rain, to the quiet collapse inside her. When her phone buzzed, she looked down. Notice of divorce hearing, tomorrow 9 a.m. Emily laughed through her tears, a dry, broken sound, as if her body had forgotten how to laugh. That night, she sat on the living room floor, hugging a pillow, staring at the ceiling. Wedding memories flashed back, him holding her hand in the garden, saying, "Forever, I promise." She whispered the words again, as if to remind herself. Forever really means today. Outside, rain fell all night, and in that house, a love died without anyone to mourn it. The next morning, Seattle was wrapped in heavy fog. The world blurred. People passed each other without faces. Emily stepped off the bus, divorce papers clutched in her cold, trembling hand. King County Courthouse loomed ahead, gray stone, imposing and indifferent, a place where hundreds of love stories ended each day, without a single tear. She walked through the glass doors. The scent of disinfectant and paper filled the air. A security guard smiled at her, but even his eyes looked tired. Everyone here seemed familiar with Heartbreak. Ethan sat neatly dressed in the waiting room, scrolling through his phone, not looking up. Emily stopped. She wished he would lift his head, smile, and say, "I'm sorry. Come home." But he didn't. He just nodded slightly. "We should go in. Don't want to be late." The judge read the legal words in a flat tone, mechanical and dry. Emily heard her name, the word divorce, and the gavel's final bang. In that instant, she was no longer Ethan Rowe's wife. She rose, quietly gathered her papers. Ethan signed, eyes averted, no goodbye, no hug, not even one last glance. When he walked out, the fluorescent light caught in his hair, cold and sharp, and then he was gone. A few minutes later, Emily followed. Outside, the rain kept falling, the wind cutting down the courthouse steps. She clutched the decree tightly, her fingers trembling, her vision blurred. Footsteps faded, the world spun, and then darkness. In the rain, a man, Daniel Pierce, stepped out of the same courthouse, his face expressionless, his eyes weary. He'd just signed his own divorce papers, losing the woman he'd loved for 8 years, the one who'd left him for a brighter life elsewhere. He reached for his phone to call his assistant, then saw a woman collapse on the steps. Papers scattered, the divorce decree soaked in a puddle. Without thinking, Daniel ran to her. He knelt, lifting her into his arms. Her face was pale, lips bluish, fingers still clutching the decree. He held her close, rain pouring over them both. A guard shouted, "Sir, are you okay?" Daniel answered quickly, "She's my wife. Call an ambulance." The wail of sirens broke through the misty city. In his hands, her breath was faint but warm. He looked at her face and saw, reflected in her closed eyes, a mirror of his broken soul, struggling to breathe through the rain. The ambulance sped through the city, red lights flashing across silent buildings and the still lake. Daniel sat beside her, eyes fixed on her face. He didn't know why, but somehow he knew. If he let go, she'd be lost. And maybe, deep down, he couldn't bear to lose anything more. Outside, Seattle remained the same, cold, wet, lonely. But inside that ambulance, two people who had just lost everything had somehow found each other in the wreckage. Seattle was cold as always that morning, and the sky was heavier, thick with the weight of days of gathered rain. Along 3rd Avenue, people hurried under their raincoats, heads down. At the same time, Emily Carter stood motionless before the King County Courthouse, where she would officially lose the person who once meant everything to her. Her hand brushed her pocket. The divorce papers were damp. Her heart pounded wildly. Her palm was slick with sweat, and she had to clench her fist to steady herself. A few other couples walked in on the stone steps, faces weary and pale, eyes hollow. Emily wondered if any of them had ever loved each other honestly, or were they all here to return promises already broken? Ethan had arrived before her. He stood in the hallway on the 3rd floor, leaning against the wall, eyes on his phone. No flowers, no greeting, not even a glance. Emily walked toward him, her shoes soaked through, a strained smile on her lips, doing nothing to hide the tears trembling in her eyes. The courtroom door opened. A judge, a clerk, and a few strangers were inside. No familiar faces, warmth, or care. Everything unfolded like a bureaucratic errand. Mrs. Emily Carter, Mr. Ethan Rowe. Both parties have agreed on assets, and no children are involved. The court approves the divorce petition. The gavel struck once sharp, hollow. A single sound, but it landed like a hammer against her heart. Emily heard every word, but her mind was blank. She nodded, swallowing hard to keep from crying. Ethan signed the papers without looking up. His signature was strong, quick, decisive, just like how he'd left her. When the judge said, "You are no longer husband and wife," she gripped the edge of her chair. Outside the window, the rain still fell. Nothing had changed except that inside her, everything had collapsed. She walked out of the courtroom like a sleepwalker. No one stopped her. No one wished her well. It all ended too easily, too cleanly, as if 7 years of love were nothing more than a contract expired. Ethan went ahead. He didn't look back. Emily watched him disappear into the long, bright corridor before turning away. Her steps weakened. Each breath grew heavier. The air smelled of damp stone and disinfectant. It made her dizzy. Sunlight flickered faintly on the wet stone steps when she reached the courthouse doors. Her heels clacked unevenly. She took one more step, then everything went dark. Shouts erupted around her. Papers scattered in the rain. The divorce decree fell into a puddle. The words, "dissolved marriage," bleeding into the water. And at that exact moment, a man walked out from the courthouse's side gate, Daniel Pierce. He wore a black suit and grey tie, his face calm but his eyes hollow. He had just divorced too. His ex-wife, Vanessa, hadn't even come. She'd sent a lawyer, signed the papers, and flown to New York with another man. Daniel hadn't cried. He only felt tired, empty. But when he saw the woman collapse before him, some instinct made him run. He knelt in the rain, lifting her into his arms. Her face was pale, hair soaked, lips bluish, her hand still clutching a crumpled paper. He touched her wrist. There was still a pulse. He gathered her up, drenched to the skin. A security guard ran over. "Sir, what happened?" Without thinking, Daniel replied, "She's my wife. She fainted." The words came out fast and he didn't take them back. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the rain. Daniel laid her on the stretcher and climbed in beside her. A nurse asked, "Relation to the patient?" "Her husband," he said firmly, a lie but one that his heart wanted to believe. On the way to the hospital, Daniel sat beside her, watching. Something about this stranger caught in his chest. Maybe it was how she still clung to the divorce paper, just as he'd once held on to his wedding photo for years, unable to tear it apart. She murmured in her half-conscious state, "Don't leave me, Ethan." Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "I won't." Nurses rushed to take her in when the ambulance reached the emergency entrance. Daniel followed, rain-soaked, hair dripping, but he didn't care. He only knew he couldn't leave her there in the storm. The Swedish medical center glowed white, the air thick with antiseptic. Emily was taken into the ER and received by a young doctor, Olivia Grant. Daniel was told to wait outside. He sat on the extended bench, hands clasped tightly together. For the first time in months, his heart beat fast, not from fear of losing love, but from fear of losing a soul struggling to hold on, just like his own. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Seattle seemed to cry for everyone who had stopped believing in love. About 2 hours later, the door opened, and Dr. Olivia stepped out, removing her mask. "She's stable," she said. "Just exhaustion and dehydration, probably from stress and not eating." Daniel nodded, relief washing through him. "You're her husband, correct?" Olivia asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. She'll need observation for a few hours." "But," Olivia paused, uncertain, "she's about 2 months pregnant." Daniel froze. "Pregnant." He looked through the small window at the woman lying inside, her face calmer now. An indescribable feeling welled up in him, part pity, part sadness, part awe. "Does she know?" he asked softly. "Not yet. She fainted before the results came in." "I'll stay," he said quietly. Olivia gave him a curious look but said nothing more. When Emily woke, the white light stung her eyes. She blinked, smelling antiseptic, seeing an unfamiliar ceiling and a man sitting beside her. "Who are you?" she asked hoarsely. Daniel turned to her, voice gentle. "I'm Daniel. I brought you here. Are you a doctor?" "No, I just happened to be there." She frowned slightly, memories surfacing: the courthouse, the rain, the fall, a shadowed face, then blackness. Her voice quivered. I got divorced, didn't I?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, but you're still breathing. That means it's not over yet." Silence fell. Then Dr. Olivia entered. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. You're 2 months pregnant." Emily froze. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. "No, that can't be," she whispered. Olivia's voice was kind. "The baby's healthy, but you need rest and proper care." When the doctor left, the room grew quiet again. Emily turned away, tears streaming. "Oh God, how can I raise a child alone?" Daniel said nothing. He moved closer and murmured, "You don't have to be alone." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've lost everything too, and I know what that feels like. Emily looked at him for a long time. There was something in his face, sad, but warm, like a coat in winter. She gave a slight nod, saying nothing. Daniel stood, ready to leave for a moment. "I'll get you some water," he said. Then, before stepping out, he added softly, almost like a promise, "I'll stay until you're okay, however long it takes." Night fell. The hospital room glowed faintly from the bedside lamp. Emily lay on her side, listening to the rain beyond the window. On the chair beside her, Daniel had fallen asleep, his head tilted, a cold cup of coffee still in his hand. She watched him, and for the first time in months, she felt calm. Not because of love, but because someone was there, silent, breathing beside her. Outside, Seattle kept raining, but inside that small room, two strangers had begun to warm each other quietly, simply, by being there. And that one lie, "she's my wife," had become a fragile thread, binding two broken hearts so they wouldn't drift away in the cold current of life. Seattle's rain kept falling outside the hospital window, steady and endless, as if the city had never known sunlight. The warm yellow light in the hospital room cast a faint glow over Emily's pale face, making her look so fragile that even a breeze might make her disappear. Daniel sat in the plastic chair beside her bed, fingers interlaced, gaze distant. The night stretched long, sleepless. He didn't know why, out of the hundreds of faces he'd seen, this woman lingered in his mind. She wasn't just a stranger he'd helped outside a courthouse. She was a reflection of himself, a broken soul, still trying to stand while her heart was splintered. When Emily woke, she found him quiet, composed, as if they'd known each other for years. "You're still here?" Her voice was hoarse. "Yeah," Daniel said with a faint smile. "I told the doctor I was your husband." She frowned, startled. "You said what?" "I don't really know why. They asked, and I just said it." A brief silence. Emily turned toward the window, then let out a trembling laugh. "I'm not sure whether to thank you or pity you." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe both." The air softened between them. She looked back, her tone gentler. "I'm Emily." "Daniel, you don't have to stay here." "Maybe not, but I want to." His voice was calm, warm, not pitying, just quietly sincere. Emily felt her throat tighten. She had grown so used to being alone that she no longer knew how to react when someone stayed. When Dr. Olivia came in to check on her, she was surprised to see Daniel still there. "Mr. Pierce, Miss Carter needs rest. You can come back tomorrow morning." Daniel nodded. "I'll wait outside in case she needs anything." Olivia smiled slightly. In all her years as a doctor, she had seen many people keep vigil, family, lovers, even strangers, but something in Daniel's eyes stopped her from insisting he leave. They were the eyes of someone who understood loss. That night, as quiet settled over the ward, Emily listened to the soft rain tapping against the window. Outside, Daniel sat in the hallway chair, his head resting against the wall, the dim light tracing the weary lines of his face and shoulders. She watched him through the cracked door and thought, "This man is as lonely as I am." Daniel brought 2 cups of coffee the next morning, 1 black latte. "I didn't know what you liked, so I got both." Emily took the latte and smiled faintly. "You know, my ex-husband never remembered what I liked. He'd order whatever, and I'd smile to pretend I didn't mind." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I used to be like that. I was so busy that I forgot whether my wife liked strawberries or blueberries. Now I remember, but it's too late." They both laughed softly, then fell silent again. Their sadness didn't need words. It only required company. When Dr. Olivia came in with the test results, Emily's eyes widened when she heard, "The baby is healthy again." She asked quietly, "Can I go home?" "Tomorrow," Olivia said, "but you'll need someone to care for you." Daniel spoke up. "I'll handle it." Emily turned to him, flustered. "You don't have to. I know, but I want to." His voice was steady, gentle, firm enough that she couldn't refuse. That second night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about the child inside her, a small life born of a love that had already died, or maybe of a mistake. She didn't know, but through the whirl of thoughts, she remembered Daniel's voice, quiet, steady, you don't have to be alone anymore. And for the first time, she drifted to sleep feeling someone's presence beside her, even if that someone was a stranger. The next morning, the Seattle sky was pale gray, but softer. Daniel stood on the balcony outside the ward, coffee in hand, looking down at the hospital garden. The distant sound of sirens mixed with drizzle, composing the city's familiar melancholy song. Emily came out, wrapped in her hospital robe. She looked fragile, but her eyes were brighter. "You're still here?" Daniel smiled. "I told you I'm staying. Aren't you afraid people will get the wrong idea? They think you're my husband." "Maybe. I like that idea." He smiled again. Her cheeks flushed. A slight warmth crept into the quiet space between two hearts, learning to trust again. They had breakfast downstairs, eggs, toast, and 2 glasses of orange juice. Daniel said, "I can't cook, but I can make orange juice." Emily laughed, the first genuine laugh in weeks. "That's good. I can't stand coffee anymore." "Why not?" "Because it reminds me of the morning he left." Daniel didn't speak. He didn't try to comfort her. He just listened. And in that silence, Emily felt safe. When they returned to the room, Dr. Olivia handed her discharge papers. "Miss Carter, you're fine to leave. Just remember rest, avoid stress." Emily nodded. Daniel said quietly, "If you don't mind, I have a spare room. You can stay for a few days." She froze. I can't accept that." "It's not pity," he said, meeting her eyes. "It's just I know what it feels like to return to an empty house." His voice was low, deliberate, sincere enough to still her words. That day, Seattle was still raining. As they left the hospital, Daniel held the umbrella, while Emily walked beside him, holding her small bag. They said nothing, as if speaking might shatter the fragile calm they'd found. In the car, Daniel asked, "Do you want to stop by your old place, pick up your things?" Emily looked out the window, raindrops tracing long streaks down the glass. "No, there's nothing there for me anymore." He nodded. The car moved along Lake Union, the lights shimmering across the surface like strands of silver. When they stopped, Emily looked up at a glass house tucked into a hillside overlooking the lake. Not large, but elegant and peaceful. "This is your home?" "Yeah. I live alone," Daniel said with a small smile. "Well, not anymore." Inside, the space was minimal and clean. An unfinished painting sat on an easel. A few books lined the shelves. The faint scent of pine lingered in the air. Emily set her bag down, looking around. "You paint?" "Sometimes, when I need to breathe." "They look sad." "Maybe because I paint with what's left." She didn't reply. Then, softly, she said, "Thank you, Daniel, for staying, for lying." He chuckled. If every lie could save someone, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing. That night, Emily lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the rain tapping against the glass roof. The house was quiet but not empty. Downstairs, Daniel was painting. The light from his studio glowed faintly, casting soft patterns across her wall. Emily closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Maybe, for the first time in a long while, I'm not afraid of the dark." On the desk, her divorce papers lay dry, their edges crinkled. Next to them was a small note Daniel had left. "You're not alone. D." A lie born from compassion, but that night, in the rain-soaked silence of Seattle, it became the most genuine promise either of them had ever known. That afternoon, Seattle was wrapped in a thin veil of mist. The last light of day broke through the gray clouds, glimmering across Lake Union like glass. Emily stood by the wide window, hands intertwined, taking in the quiet expanse of the living room. She had never been anywhere this peaceful. No arguing voices, no slamming doors, no trace of foreign perfume clinging to someone else's shirt. Only the soft patter of rain on the glass roof and the faint scent of pine wood in the air. Daniel came from the kitchen carrying 2 glasses of orange juice. Dressed in a grey sweater, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes steady but distant. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emily nodded. "Yes, just strange. I've never lived in a stranger's house before." Daniel smiled faintly. "Well, I've never had a stranger move in either." They both laughed, a fragile but genuine sound. That first evening, they ate in silence. Daniel wasn't a cook. The pasta was bland, but Emily finished every bite. "That's the first time anyone's ever eaten everything I made," Daniel said with a grin. "That's the first time I've eaten without pretending it was good." Their eyes met and they both laughed again. After dinner, Emily wandered through the house. It sat close to the lake, walls of glass reflecting the rippling water. Unfinished paintings lined the walls in cold tones: grey, blue, black. She stopped in front of one. "What's this one about?" Daniel looked over. "That's what I paint when I don't have words anymore." She nodded gently. She understood some pain didn't need explaining. It only needed someone to sit beside it in silence. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. She heard the scratch of Daniel's pencil downstairs, the steady fall of rain, and her own heartbeat. All of it blended into one rhythm, melancholy, yet calm. Around midnight, she went downstairs. Daniel was still at his easel, the desk lamp casting a soft light over his face. "You're not asleep?" she asked. He startled slightly, then smiled. "No, I don't sleep well when it rains." "Painting?" "Yeah. What about you?" "I couldn't sleep either." She sat across from him. The light touched her pale face, fragile yet strangely serene. Daniel looked at her quietly. "Are you afraid?" "Of what?" "The future. Being a mother alone." Emily was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "Yes, terrified. But I think what's worse is having no one to tell that you're scared." Daniel nodded, a shadow passing through his eyes. "I know that feeling." They sat without speaking. The rain kept falling, reflections of light rippling across the lake. It was the first night they honestly talked, not as strangers, but as two people standing at the same edge, realizing they weren't falling alone this time. The next morning, Daniel woke early and searched the kitchen. He wasn't good at cooking, but he tried anyway. When Emily came down, she found eggs, toast, and a glass of warm milk waiting on the table. "You made this?" "Yeah. I followed an online tutorial." "What about that burnt smell?" He grinned, proof of effort. She laughed, and sunlight slipped through the glass, catching in her hair. Daniel smiled back. For the first time, the house didn't feel empty. In the following days, they grew used to each other's presence. Emily cleaned and cooked. Daniel worked and painted. They watched the news together in the evenings, sometimes without saying a word, but the silence was gentle. They didn't need to fill it. Just existing side by side was enough. Sitting by the fireplace one night, Emily asked, "If your ex-wife returned, would you forgive her?" Daniel stared into the flames. "I don't hate her anymore, but there's no place for her in my life now." "Why not?" "Because she never understood that love doesn't always have to burn bright. Sometimes, it just means staying even when nothing feels beautiful anymore." Emily watched him for a long time, then smiled softly. "Thank you for staying," he replied. "You don't have to thank me. Maybe you're staying for me, too." That night, Daniel painted while Emily wrote a few lines in her small notebook. "I once thought I was shattered, but maybe breaking is the only way light can enter." Days passed, and the house by the lake found its rhythm. Emily planted lavender on the balcony, the scent drifting through the open window of Daniel's studio. He bought cookbooks and learned how to boil eggs without breaking them. Seattle still rained, but the rain no longer felt heavy. It made the lake shine brighter and their nights by the fire warmer. One morning, while slicing apples, Emily felt a flutter in her belly. She froze. Her hand stopped midair, eyes widening, a faint, unmistakable kick. She placed her palm over her stomach and began to cry, not from sadness, but from the miracle of life insisting on being alive inside her. Daniel came in and saw the tears on her cheeks. He rushed over. "What's wrong?" She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Do you feel it?" He stood still, then nodded, a slight movement, soft and warm like a second heartbeat. They stayed there, unmoving. Rain dripped from the eaves, light glinting off the glass. Daniel said quietly, trembling, "The baby knows her mother survived." Emily laughed through her tears. "Maybe. And she knows someone's here, too." He squeezed her hand. "I'll protect you both, whatever happens." In that moment, nothing more needed to be said. A promise was enough. From that day, Daniel's care became quieter, steadier, not born of pity, but of choice. He cleared the small room by the window, set up a wooden crib, and painted the walls a soft beige. When Emily saw it, she smiled through tears. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said, "but I want this house to hear a baby's cry." She laughed. "You've never heard one at 3 a.m., have you?" "Then I'll make the bottles," Daniel replied, half teasing, half sincere. They became something unspoken, two people bound not by romance, but by healing. Emily began teaching reading classes for children online. Daniel often sat nearby, listening, offering a comment, and smiling. He realized that her laughter could warm the entire house. One evening, the power went out. The house fell into darkness. Emily panicked for a moment, reaching out unquestioningly. Daniel's hand found hers. "It's okay," he said gently. "Just a blackout." Their faces were closer than ever in the glow of a single candle. He saw her eyes sad, deep, but shining. She saw something true in his, a place to rest when the world grew heavy. Neither spoke. They sat there, listening to the rain and their own hearts. When the lights flickered back on, Emily turned away, hiding a small smile. Daniel stepped onto the balcony. The rain had stopped. The night sky opened wide, city lights shimmering across the lake. He breathed deeply, chest lighter than it had been in years. Daniel Pierce felt alive again for the first time, not in boardrooms or glass towers, but here, with someone learning to trust life again. And that night, before sleeping, Emily wrote another line in her journal. "He doesn't say much, but every time I'm afraid, he's there." Maybe love doesn't have to begin with words, it can start with presence. Night settled softly over Seattle. In the house by Lake Union, two broken souls were learning to move forward together slowly, gently, and honestly. Morning in Seattle came with a thin drizzle. Rare sunlight filtered through the mist, laying a golden thread across Lake Union. Inside the glass house by the water, Emily stood in the kitchen, wrapped in a grey cardigan, her hair tied up, quietly humming as she sliced fruit. From his desk, Daniel watched her. He was supposed to be revising blueprints for an architecture project, but his eyes drifted toward her the way she bowed her head slightly, the calmness in her movements. She made the house feel alive again. He smiled softly, not the smile of joy, but of peace. She placed a plate of fruit before him. "Eat, or you'll skip breakfast again." "I already did." "You're a terrible liar, Daniel. Your plate's still empty." He chuckled. "Guess I forgot you notice everything." Emily replied, "Actually, I just guessed." But guessing right is what women do after being left behind. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then they both smiled. Not the hesitant smiles of the early days, but the kind that comes when two people have learned to accept their past as part of who they are. That afternoon, Emily went out to the garden behind the house. She planted more lavender. Their scent gave her peace. Daniel helped dig the soil and mud from his hands, and she heard him laugh freely for the first time. "I never thought gardening could be this fun. And I thought you only painted and drank coffee," she teased. "I figured CEOs don't use shovels." He shot back. "Well, now I do." His eyes sparkled under the soft light. As dusk settled, they sat together on the balcony, watching the drizzle drift across the lake. "I used to hate rain," Emily said quietly. "It reminded me of waiting for someone who never came home." Daniel was silent for a while before answering. "I used to love rain, but after living alone, it just sounded empty. And now?" He looked toward the lake. "Now the rain's the same, but I don't feel cold anymore." A long pause followed. Rain, heartbeats, and breaths, all blended into one rhythm. From afar, they might have looked like two silhouettes by the window, not touching, but bound by something invisible and tender. That night, Daniel opened his sketchbook. He began drawing the scene from that afternoon, a woman with her hair tied up, holding a pot of lavender by a foggy Seattle lake. When Emily passed by, she stopped. "You're drawing me." "Not exactly," he said. "I'm drawing what makes me feel calm." She smiled gently. "That could change, you know. Today it's me. Tomorrow, it might be raining." He put his pencil down and looked at her. "What makes you feel calm?" She thought for a moment. "Not having to pretend I'm okay in front of someone." Daniel said nothing. He understood. Some wounds were so deep that you only dared to breathe softly when alone, but now they were learning to breathe together. A week later, Emily resumed her online teaching. Children's laughter filled the house, lighting her face in a way Daniel hadn't seen before. He worked across the table, occasionally glancing up. She told her students, "Good things take time," and smiled. "See, even happiness takes time to find its way to us." Daniel lifted his head. The words sank deep. Maybe, he thought, she was teaching him that too. That night, when Emily went to bed, Daniel stayed downstairs, writing in his sketch journal. "She's not just healing. She's teaching me how to heal, too." Autumn came to Seattle. Red maple leaves blanketed the path, glowing beneath the streetlights. Emily, wrapped in a thick sweater, stood by the lake with a cup of cocoa. Daniel came up behind her with a scarf and draped it gently around her shoulders. "I don't want you to get cold. I'm fine." "No, you have that kind of fine that people don't realize means you're about to break." She looked at him, half amused, half moved. "You notice too much. Only because I used to say I'm fine the same way." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. The kind of silence spoke the language of those who had known loss where words were unnecessary, and presence said enough. One afternoon, while reading on the sofa, Emily felt a kick. She gasped, setting her book aside, hand on her belly. Daniel looked over and came to her side. "Another kick?" "Yes. I think she's trying to say something. Maybe she's saying thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up." Emily's eyes shimmered with tears. "I'm not as strong as you think, Daniel." "No one's strong, Emily. We choose stand up or stay broken." She began to cry, honestly cry, for the first time in months. She leaned against his shoulder, and Daniel let her. He didn't speak. He touched her back steadily. That simple gesture was enough to break her heart open and begin to mend it. When she finally looked up, he said softly, "I used to think losing everything meant the end. But maybe sometimes losing makes room for something new." She whispered, "Maybe that something new has also been broken once." They smiled, not the smile of romance but of two people who had survived the same storm. Later that evening, as Daniel washed the dishes, Emily came over. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." He turned and smiled. "You know, sometimes I think you're the one who saved me." She shook her head. "No one saved anyone. We just found each other at the right time." Outside, the wind stirred the maple leaves across the porch. Daniel watched her and thought, if fate exists, it must look like this. Night fell. The house grew still. Emily lay in bed, listening to the faint sounds from downstairs: clinking dishes, running water, slow footsteps. She smiled softly. That feeling of safety, knowing someone was there, not loud, not promising anything, just there. She opened her journal and wrote, "I don't need to be rescued. I need someone to stay long enough to remind me that I can still love." Daniel blew out the lights downstairs, leaving one candle burning on the table. On his easel stood a new painting. Lake Union, light rain, a woman reading under the porch. He signed his name in the corner for the first time in years. His hand trembled, but the line was sure. The candlelight flickered against the window, its reflection trembling across the dark water, like a small flame refusing to go out. Two people once broken were quietly finding their way back, not through grand declarations, but through the gentleness of silence and the quiet warmth of someone who stayed. One early winter afternoon, when Seattle's rain had turned to a light dusting of snow, Emily was folding baby clothes in the nursery. The soft light streaming through the window bathed the room in a gentle golden warmth. For the first time in months, she felt peace, quiet, steady peace in every breath, every touch on the tiny, neatly folded garments on the bed. In the living room, Daniel was hanging new paintings. He'd been painting constantly lately, not for work, but for feeling. Each time Emily smiled, he wanted to capture it, to keep it alive in color. Then her phone buzzed. Emily glanced at the screen. Ethan Rowe. Her body froze. Her heart thudded hard against her ribs, as if someone had pulled her backward into a life she thought she had buried. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the glowing name. Should she ignore it or answer? Daniel stepped out and saw her face. "What's wrong?" She hid the phone behind her back and shook her head. "Nothing." But her voice trembled. Daniel didn't press. He looked at her with quiet understanding. A moment later, the phone buzzed again. Its sharp tone cut through the stillness like a blade. Emily inhaled deeply and answered. Ethan's voice came through, low, confident, painfully familiar. "Emily, how are you?" She didn't reply. "I just want to see you once. Talk. I regret what happened." Her spine went cold. Regret? After all this time, after all that pain, did he think a single call could undo it? "What do you want?" she asked, her voice rough. "Just to meet. 5 minutes. Gasworks Park. Tomorrow." Before she could answer, the line went dead. Emily stood still, her hand trembling. Old feelings crept back, fear, anger, the ache of a weakness she thought she'd outgrown. Daniel remained seated at his desk, silent. But when she finally set the phone down, he said quietly, "It was him, wasn't it?" She nodded. "He wants to meet?" "Yes." "Will you go?" She was quiet for a long time, then whispered, "I don't know. Part of me wants to understand. The other part wants to forget." Daniel nodded, calm and steady. "If you need to go, go. Closure doesn't come from running away. It comes when you can face it without shaking." Emily looked at him. His eyes showed no jealousy, only a patient kind of faith. And somehow, that meant more to her than love itself. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the rain, remembering dinners in silence, glances without warmth, mornings when Ethan left without a word. She had once imagined asking him why. Now that she finally could, she feared his answer would change nothing. The next day, the sky was its usual steel gray. At Gasworks Park, the old iron structures rose against the lake. Light rain blurred the horizon. Ethan was already there, coat collar up, hair tousled, face more tired than she remembered. When he saw her, he smiled. "You look just as beautiful as ever." The words stung, but they didn't soften her. "What do you want to say?" she asked evenly. He sighed, looking out over the lake. "I was wrong. I was scared of marriage, of responsibility, of seeing you hurt. When you cried, I didn't know what to do, so I left." Emily watched him, steady. "Do you have any idea how much that hurt?" "I know, and I regret it." She gave a short laugh, tears glinting but not falling. "You regret it not because you lost me, but because you lost your chance to feel like a good man again, right?" Ethan said nothing. "What do you need from me?" "I just want to help. You and the baby. To make yourself feel better, maybe." She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "The baby doesn't need your guilt, Ethan. She needs love. Something you never dared to give." Ethan dropped his gaze. "You've changed." "No, Ethan. I just finally learned to love myself." She turned to leave. He caught her wrist. "Emily, don't go." She pulled away, her voice soft but firm. "You don't have that right anymore." Her steps were heavy but sure. Looking up, she saw Daniel standing far away beneath a black umbrella. He hadn't interrupted. He watched her with calm eyes that said, "I'm here. Do what you need to do." She walked to him and stopped. "You heard everything?" "No," he said. "But I saw you standing tall." Her eyes filled again. "I thought I'd cry, but it turns out I ran out of tears for him long ago." Daniel smiled gently. "You've cried enough for one lifetime. Now it's time to live." That evening, back home, Emily sat by the fire. Daniel brought her a cup of hot ginger tea and set it down. "You did well," he said softly. "I just feel empty." Emptiness is a step forward. It means you've made space for something new. She smiled faintly. "You always sound like a book." "No, just experience." A quiet pause. She looked at him and whispered, "Thank you for being there today. I just didn't want you to feel alone." "I wasn't." She placed her hand lightly over his. "Because you were there." Daniel didn't move. His eyes softened, half surprised, half tender. He didn't pull away. They sat that way, hands touching, firelight flickering across their skin. Days later, Ethan sent an email. "I'm sorry. I'm leaving Seattle. I wish you happiness." Emily read it and smiled without anger, grief, or longing. She printed it, fed it into the fireplace, and watched it burn to ash. Daniel stepped beside her. She said quietly, Some things should only end in silence. He nodded. Yes, because sometimes fire is its own kind of forgiveness. A week later, Daniel took Emily for a walk by the lake. Snow dusted the grass. The water reflected a bronze sunset. He said, "I used to think I couldn't love again. But then I met you not because I needed to fill the emptiness, but because, for the first time, someone made me want to open up." Emily stopped. "Daniel, what are you saying?" "I don't know," he said softly. "Only that, whatever happens, I'm here. Not as someone to save you, but as someone to walk beside you." She smiled, eyes shining in the fading light. "You know, Daniel, when you say, 'I'm here,' I actually believe you." A cold wind swept by. Daniel reached up, pulling her scarf gently around her neck. A small gesture, but it warmed her to the core. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Today, I'm no longer afraid to speak of the past, because I finally have a present warm enough to stand in without shaking." Downstairs, Daniel returned to a painting he'd left unfinished. This time, there were no cold tones. He added a wash of gold light reflecting through the window. Two figures stood by Lake Union in the frame, snow falling softly around them. At the bottom, he wrote a single line. She faced her ghosts and found her home. February in Seattle was colder than usual. The rain had lingered for days before stopping suddenly, giving way to a soft, breath-like snowfall. Lake Union lay still beneath a shroud of thick mist that felt like the entire city was asleep. Emily sat by the window, hands cradling her belly. The baby was nearly due. Each movement inside her filled her with both fear and joy. Daniel was in the kitchen making tea, his hands trembling slightly from the cold, but his voice calm and warm. "Peppermint, right? The doctor said it helps you sleep." Emily smiled, taking the cup. "You really do follow every instruction word for word. I just don't want to make a single mistake with either of you." They sat in quiet companionship, watching the snow. The fire crackled, dancing light over the walls, warming their faces. No words were needed. The whole room seemed to breathe with them. That night, Emily woke to a sharp pain. She bit her lip, breathing hard, clutching the edge of the blanket. Daniel heard the sound and bolted upright. "What's wrong?" "I think it's time," she whispered, voice trembling. He scrambled for the car keys, nearly tripping in panic. She managed a weak laugh through the pain. "Calm down, Daniel. This isn't a movie. I've never done this before. Neither have I." Laughter, pain, and breath filled the house. Daniel helped her to the car as snow thickened, the wind sweeping across the dark road. "Breathe, Emily, slow and deep, like the doctor said." "I'm trying, Daniel. I know. I'm here. I'm right here." The car raced through the white night. Reflections of passing lights flickered across his face, tense, terrified, but fiercely determined. When they reached the hospital, Daniel leapt out and shouted, "She's in labor. Please help her." The waiting felt endless. He stood outside the delivery room, hands clenched so tight they went pale. The sound of her cries behind the door made him feel powerless. He wanted to rush in, but a nurse stopped him. "We'll call you when she needs you." He sat down, his head bowed, his palms slick with sweat. Images of Emily flashed before him, her laugh by the porch, her quiet tears, her strength in the garden, her voice when she said she wasn't alone. He realized he didn't know when he'd fallen in love with her. He only knew that the thought of losing her was unbearable. The door swung open. "Mr. Pierce, she wants you inside," the nurse said. He almost ran. Emily lay there, hair damp, face pale, sweat glistening on her forehead. Her eyes were wild with pain. Daniel took her hand, whispered, "I'm here. Just breathe, Emily. With me." She turned to him, smiling through her tears. "I know. You always are." In that moment, they weren't two broken people anymore. They were two souls fighting together for life. Time stopped. There was only the sound of heartbeats, her ragged breathing, the doctor's steady counting, and Daniel's hand holding hers tight. And then, a cry. High, sharp, beautiful. The room seemed to flood with light, as if spring had entered in one breath. Emily burst into tears, not from pain but pure, overwhelming joy. Daniel cried too, unable to stop. His whole body trembled as the nurse placed the baby in her arms, a minor, red, perfect miracle. Our son. His voice broke. Emily smiled through her tears. What should we name him? Daniel looked at the child and whispered, Noah. It means light after the flood. She nodded. Noah Pierce. I love it. The baby opened his eyes, his tiny hand wrapping Daniel's finger, and in that touch, Daniel felt something inside him heal. For the first time, his heart wasn't a hollow space for what he'd lost, it was full of what he'd found. 3 days later, Emily came home. Daniel had prepared everything, the crib, the bottles, even the blankets folded neatly. He wouldn't let her lift a thing. You're acting like a full-time dad, she teased. I'm the one here, aren't I? Then I worry. That's my job. She smiled. You cried when Noah was born. I did. You looked like a kid on Christmas morning. That's because he was the gift, Daniel said softly. That evening, Emily hummed a lullaby, rocking Noah to sleep. The sound blended with the rain tapping against the glass. Daniel sat nearby, watching the two of them. He said quietly, I used to think happiness was when everything was perfect. But seeing you and Noah now, I think happiness is just having someone to come home to. Emily looked up, eyes glistening. Daniel, yeah? I love you. He froze not from surprise, but from the feeling of his heart catching up to the words it had waited to hear. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. I love you too, Emily. Not because you need me, but because I can't imagine this life without you and Noah. She rested her head on his shoulder, watching Noah's tiny chest rise and fall. In that moment, time stopped. Every storm, every heartbreak, every drop of Seattle rain, all of it had led here. After Emily fell asleep, Daniel stayed by the crib. He placed a hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat, then whispered to the sleeping baby, Welcome to the world, Noah. I don't know if I'll get everything right, but I promise I'll never leave. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady. But this time, it didn't sound sad. It mingled with the quiet breathing of 3 souls, a family born from the ashes of broken hearts. That spring came late to Seattle, but inside the little glass house by Lake Union, spring had already arrived the day Noah let out his first cry. Mornings began with a baby's wail, the kettle whistling, and Daniel's clumsy attempts at singing lullabies in the kitchen. He'd never imagined he could memorize Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star so completely or sing it so off-key and still keep going. Emily often sat on the sofa, Noah in her arms, watching him wrestle with the formula. You made it too strong again, she teased. It's fine. I tried it, it tastes okay. You tried it? Yeah. Why? Then Noah's going to think his dad is courageous. They both laughed. Their laughter blended with the soft patter of rain outside, filling the quiet house with the sound of life. At night, when Noah slept, they would sit by the fire, Daniel sketching, Emily reading. Sometimes, they wouldn't speak for hours. Yet the silence between them felt closer than any conversation. What are you drawing? She asked once. A family, he said without looking up. A family? Yeah, you, Noah, and I. Don't worry about proportions. Did you make yourself bigger? No. I put myself behind you too. Emily looked at him, her chest tightening with something she couldn't name, gratitude, love, and the quiet fear that everything this good couldn't be real. I don't know what I did to deserve you, she whispered. Daniel smiled. I used to ask myself the same thing. But maybe God doesn't reward the perfect, just the ones brave enough to start over. The days passed, and Noah grew fast. He had Emily's brown eyes and Daniel's half-crooked smile. When Daniel held him, his eyes softened. The distance in him was gone. One afternoon, when Daniel came home from work, Noah spotted him through the window, squealed, and stretched out his tiny arms. Emily stood by, smiling at the 2 men in her life. She needed nothing more, just this. Just them. That night, Daniel woke in the middle of the night. He went downstairs and stopped before the painting on the wall, the one of them, a small family by the lake. In the dim light, he touched the frame gently and whispered, I didn't just paint a family, I found one. The next morning, he met with his lawyer friend. Pierce, are you sure about this? The friend asked. I'm sure. I want to adopt Noah legally. You know what that means? All the responsibility, the law, everything? Daniel nodded, steady. I know. I don't want to be there for them. I want to belong to them. That afternoon, he came home with a folder in hand. Emily was rocking Noah to sleep. Daniel sat beside her, opened the bag, and placed a document on the table. Do you know what this is? She glanced over. What? Adoption papers. I want Noah to have my last name Pierce. She froze. Daniel, you don't have to answer now. I want you to know I'm not doing this to prove anything. I don't ever want him to wonder who his father is. Tears rolled down her cheeks. You really want to be his father? I already am, he said softly. The paper's just catching up. She threw her arms around him. His shoulders trembled. For the first time in years, Daniel Pierce cried not from loss, but from finally finding the thing every wound in him had been reaching for, love, in the shape of a family. On the day of the hearing, Seattle gave them a rare, bright sky. Sunlight spilled through the courthouse windows, glowing on polished wood. Daniel wore a blue suit, holding Emily's hand. In her arms, Noah slept, wrapped in a white blanket. The judge looked over the documents, then smiled. Mr. Pierce, do you fully understand the responsibilities of this adoption? Once you sign, Noah will be your legal son. Daniel nodded. I do, and I'm ready. Emily looked at him, her eyes saying everything words could not. When he signed, the judge smiled warmly. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Pierce. Those words the Pierce family echoed through the quiet courtroom like a song of sunlight. Daniel bent down to Noah and whispered, Did you hear that, son? You have a dad now. That night, they celebrated with a simple dinner, no guests, just the three. Emily made Daniel's favorite stew. He opened a bottle of wine. Mid-meal, Emily said. I used to think happiness meant being loved forever. Now I think it means finding someone who chooses you daily. Daniel set down his glass and looked at her. And I choose you. Today, tomorrow, and even when we argue about diaper duty. She laughed, squeezing his hand. Deal. Before bed, Daniel carried Noah onto the balcony. The night was calm. City lights shimmered on the lake. Look, son, he said softly. This is where it all began, where I met your mom, where two broken hearts found their way back. He kissed the baby's forehead. I won't promise to be perfect, but I promise you and your mom will never be alone. Emily stepped out, draped a blanket over his shoulders, and leaned against him. I don't know what the future holds, she whispered, but if I could choose again, I'd still choose that night you carried me through the rain. Daniel smiled. And I'd choose this one because now I have everything. Night fell softly over Lake Union. Noah slept peacefully in the warm glow spilling through the windows while Emily and Daniel lay side by side. No words, only breath steady, shared, content. Outside, the rain began again, gentle and warm. This time, it wasn't sorrowful. It was a lullaby for a family born from the ruins of broken hearts. On the bedside table, Emily's journal lay open, the ink still fresh. Family isn't where we're born, it's where we are reborn. Late autumn arrived in Seattle. The wind grew sharp, and crimson maple leaves blanketed the path around Lake Union. Emily was baking apple pie in the glass house by the water. The warm scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen. Noah crawled across the rug, giggling, while Daniel sat beside him, large, clumsy hands, soft, careful eyes. Everything looked like a perfect, peaceful painting. Until the doorbell rang. Emily wiped her hands and went to answer it. A cold gust swept in along with a face she thought she would never see again. Ethan Rowe. He stood there, thinner, hollow-eyed, his stubble unshaven, his coat soaked. The polished man she once knew was gone. He spoke softly, voice rough. Hello, Emily. She froze. Behind her, Daniel appeared with Noah in his arms. His gaze settled on the man at the door, his grip tightening instinctively around the child. For a few seconds, no one spoke, only the sound of rain tapping against the glass. Ethan's eyes fell on Noah. His voice shook. Is that my son? The air turned to ice. Emily took a slow breath. No, he's Daniel's son. Ethan's face faltered, then twisted into a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. I know I was wrong, but I want to make it right. You have to let me see him. See him? Daniel said, his tone low and steady. What right do you think you have? Ethan turned toward him, trying to steady himself. I'm his biological father, Daniel answered quietly, every word deliberate. And I'm the one who was there when she screamed in pain, when she gave birth, when he cried his first night. Where were you then? The air thickened. Emily laid a hand on Daniel's arm. Enough. Let me. She faced Ethan, her voice calm but firm. Did you come here to find your son or yourself? He said nothing. You left when I needed you most. And now you think a few words can erase everything? I'm not asking to erase it, Emily. I want a chance to be a father. She looked at him for a long time. Father? She said softly. A father isn't the one who gives life, Ethan. He's the one who stays when all that's left is darkness. Ethan lowered his head, silent. Daniel stood behind her, jaw tight, but eyes composed. Ethan finally stepped back, voice unsteady. I won't give up. I'll go to court if I have to. Emily's stomach clenched, but Daniel stepped forward, his tone measured. You can do what you want, but before you drag us into court, ask yourself, are you doing it for the child, or to fix your pride? Ethan didn't respond. He turned away, his figure fading into the grey rain of Seattle. Emily stood motionless, heart pounding. Daniel's hand came to rest on her shoulder. You okay? I don't know. I thought this was over. It is. The past can knock on the door, but it no longer has the key. His words wrapped around her like a blanket against the cold. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the reflection of city lights tremble on the water. She thought about Ethan, about how he'd once made her believe love had to be dazzling and loud. But now, she knew, real love wasn't firework, bright. It was steady. It was someone making tea in the morning, changing diapers when you're too tired, and sitting quietly beside you when words aren't enough. Daniel came up behind her, wearing a sweater, and sat down. Couldn't sleep? I just keep thinking. What if he really goes to court? Then we face it. You're not afraid? No. Because I know who's standing with me. She turned toward him, tears glistening. You really think I'm strong enough to hold all this? I don't think I know. She smiled through her tears. You always make me believe I'm not weak. That's because you never were. You were just tricked into thinking you were. The next day, Daniel met with his lawyer. I want to be prepared in case Ethan tries anything, he said. Are you worried? The lawyer asked. Daniel shook his head. No. I don't want Emily to fight alone anymore. Emily watched Noah playing on the floor at home, peace settling over her. She realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Ethan's name, not of losing Daniel, because now she knew, if something is real, it stands firm against every storm. A week later, Ethan returned not with papers, but with weary eyes. I'm not suing, he said quietly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I saw you, Emily, happy, and I don't want to ruin that. She nodded softly. Thank you for saying that. Ethan turned to Daniel, extending his hand. Thank you for being the man I couldn't be. Daniel took his hand, firm but without anger. There was no triumph, only closure. As Ethan walked away, Emily stood on the porch, whispering, goodbye. No bitterness, no tears, just a farewell as light as breath. That night, after Noah fell asleep, they sat together by the fire. Daniel said, I don't see the point in holding on to anger anymore. The past doesn't deserve the weight. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. No, we've come too far to look back. A gust of wind brushed past the window, carrying the sound of maple leaves falling. Daniel squeezed her hand. Sometimes courage isn't leaving, it's staying. Emily smiled. And I stayed. With you. That night, as Seattle grew quiet, Emily opened her journal and wrote, He came back, but I wasn't afraid, because I'm no longer the woman he left. I'm Noah's mother, a woman loved, and part of a home that's real. Downstairs, Daniel studied his newest painting of their house, now with 3 figures, a man, a woman, and a laughing child. He signed his name at the bottom, the family we fought for. Outside, the rain began again, not the rain of endings, but of endurance and faith, a love that had outlived its ghosts and was finally ready for tomorrow. Spring came late to Seattle, but in the house by Lake Union, it had arrived early the moment Noah's laughter began to fill every morning. The days now started with the sound of a baby's giggle, the whistle of boiling water, and Daniel's terribly off-key version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. He never thought he'd know the lyrics by heart, or that singing them wrong could make someone so happy. Emily sat on the sofa, Noah in her lap, watching Daniel wrestle with the baby formula. "You made it too thick again," she teased. "It's fine. I tasted it." "You tasted it?" "Yeah. So Noah's going to think his dad is fearless." They both laughed. Their laughter mingled with the soft drizzle outside, filling the home with brand new warmth. While Noah squealed with laughter on the rug one afternoon, Daniel crawled on all fours pretending to be a lion. Emily leaned against the doorframe, smiling. The man who once spoke little and carried the heaviness of silence now roared and growled to hear his son laugh. She thought, "I never imagined this house could sound so alive." Daniel caught her watching. "Keep staring like that, and you'll make me self-conscious. Am I as handsome as a lion?" She laughed. "You're more convincing as a single dad. What about as your husband? You haven't auditioned yet." Daniel stood up, brushing off his hands. "Then maybe it's time I tried." Before she could respond, he knelt. The room fell silent, a small, simple ring in his hand, gleaming in the afternoon light. His voice was calm, but his eyes were steady. "I can't promise I'll make you happy every day, but I promise I'll keep choosing you even on the hard ones. I can't promise I'll always be right, but I promise I'll never walk away. Emily Carter, will you marry me?" Emily stood frozen, tears spilling before she could even speak. Noah crawled closer, tugging at her hand, giggling as if he knew the answer. She laughed through her tears. "I think we all know what I'm going to say." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. She could hear her heartbeat in his embrace, steady, strong, at peace. Outside, the lavender swayed in the sunlight. Time paused momentarily, holding them in that fragile, beautiful now. A month later, they got married by the lake. No grand ceremony, no crowd, just a few close friends, flowers, and the soft gold of sunset spreading over the water. Emily wore a simple white dress, her hair pinned loosely, and she held a bouquet of lavender, the same kind Daniel had planted for her the year before. Daniel wore a light grey suit with a white flower on his lapel. Noah ran between their legs in a tiny vest, making everyone laugh. As the music began, Emily walked down a path strewn with petals. Daniel waited at the end, eyes locked on hers. There were no trumpets, no fanfare, only the sound of wind, the soft lapping of waves, and two hearts beating in time. When she reached him, Daniel took her hand and whispered, "I used to think love ended when we broke up, but now I know it begins when we're brave enough to love again." Emily smiled. "And when we find someone who knows how to stay." The officiant began the vows. Danielle went first. "I, Daniel Pierce, promise to love you in rain and in sun, when you laugh, when you cry, and even when you throw me out of bed because Noah's crying at 3 a.m. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Emily shook her head, tears glistening. Then she spoke. "I, Emily Carter, promise to choose you every morning when I wake, because I've known what it means to lose everything, and now I only want to keep what truly matters." They exchanged rings, then kissed softly, simply, thoroughly. Applause broke out. Noah's giggle rang through the open air. Under the bright Seattle sky, their laughter joined the sound of waves. That evening, they sat by the lake. Daniel draped his jacket over her shoulders. Noah slept soundly in her arms. The city lights shimmered on the water like 1,000 tiny stars. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. "See that? Everything's calm now." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, we're finally home." She smiled. "I used to be afraid of love, but now I know it's not about forever promises. It's about choosing to stay, every day." He kissed her forehead. "And I'll choose you, every day, for the rest of my life." Later that night, as Daniel carried Noah inside, Emily lingered on the porch. A soft drizzle began to fall, not enough to soak, just a whisper from the city witnessing their pain, tears, and miracles. She closed her eyes, breathed in, and smiled. No longer the trembling woman in a cold kitchen, no longer the one who stood afraid in court. Now, she was Emily Pierce, a mother, a wife, a woman who had learned to love again. Inside, the lights dimmed. Noah laughed in his sleep. Daniel's voice murmured, Good night, my love. And the sound of rain mingled with their breaths. 3 heartbeats. 1 family, born from the ashes of once broken hearts. On the bedside table lay Emily's final journal, closed with the last handwritten lines. No one saved anyone. We just helped each other remember how to save ourselves. And that is the greatest miracle of love.